So I want you to be comfortable, and you know that the transphobia question always comes up, especially about the party. If you don't want me to ask it, I won't, because that's, you know, but like I said, this has to be a safe space even for you, like especially
I'm good.
let's like, forget even, sorry about that, that was misspoken on my part, especially for you, because you're the one who's putting yourself out there for us, and be, like I said, like the art of truth, and the art, like the
So I'm happy to talk about it. And I think that it's important because it's not who we are and it's not who we should be as Greens. And the reason I speak about it is because I believe that we are actually something far better. We need to be something far better. And therefore, the point is, let's talk about this so that we can publicly demonstrate that we're doing something about it. And in doing so, we will be better than everybody else. Because to think that we're the only ones with this problem is not true, because I've heard these stories coming out of different parties. It exists everywhere because it exists in our society. And we have a larger problem, I would say, of people saying, let's not care about anybody who's marginalized because we have an urgent climate emergency, when it is those who are marginalized who experience the worst effects of it. That in itself is a problem of discrimination that is definitely not just transphobia. And that's the other thing. Like I experienced a lot of things, both because it started in before the leadership race, but then also because, like, with dealing with intersection, transphobia is not the only thing I experienced. But I don't chalk it up to Greens being any different. It's just there's a lot of members. I interacted with a lot of people, and there's a lot of prejudice out there. And there is a tendency for that to surface when you're in a position where it can show up. So the stuff that we experienced was wide ranging, included, disparaging racist emails. There's definitely ableism around PTSD as well. Random homophobia. And a lot of the time when I say something, people are like, oh, people just talking on the internet. I'm like, yeah, I really wish it was just the internet. I wish it wasn't like while doing canvassing phone calls and agreeing to talk to people, that people would tell me to my face that my identity was just not real and that I was causing problems when they don't need to be any, or that I'm difficult, or that I'm the problem that's messing up the English language, which is, I mean, a huge amount of power if it was true. That I could be the one that's messing up all of this. Or the fact that in asking that people respect pronouns, which we do for everybody else, including everyone's pets that we meet on the street. Everyone corrects themselves about someone else's dog, after all. That I was the reason people would not be allies to the non-binary community, because I dared to be insistent one time. And so my experience was that I didn't want to focus on my identity, even though it came up, because it shouldn't be what this is all about. And yet it was. And it was what people picked to tell me. Canada wasn't ready to have somebody like me. I'm too risky. I'm too dangerous. No matter what. So what does that say to me? Because I will fight for the rights of people who need rights. It doesn't have to be something that I relate to. It doesn't have to be something that I've experienced. It's just what is right. But I'm a problem for having said these things. Non-binary means that my gender is neither male nor female. I am something else. Or I don't feel much, or I don't care. But that's, making a big deal of that, where it wasn't to me. I wanted to focus on everything else. What happens to the qualifications of somebody who spent a decade getting a PhD? And yet it's my gender that's a problem. How is this not the same thing that we fought for with feminism for so many decades? That we try to say that we should not say that women are incapable because of their gender, that maybe we should throw that assumption out, that maybe we're all people and we all deserve the same rights to be respected, to be given the same access to healthcare, which is still definitely not there, to have our pain taken seriously. And it's just a continuation. And so when I got pushed back very, very, very consistently from people saying that I was the problem, that me pushing for the rights of people whose genders don't fit in the binary was hurting women's rights. And from people in a party that I believe stands for everything that I stand for. It goes beyond respect for diversity. It is social justice. It is nonviolence. And that is what I didn't see reflected. So what I hope to do in bringing these issues forward is to give us the opportunity to reflect upon ourselves and say, this is not who we want to be. And this is currently who is part of who we are. And it's in that moment that we don't react with violence, with condescension, with anger to the people who've been doing this. And for the many, many, many people that were like that, only some of them were persistent. But what they need is a conversation to talk about why it's harmful. Because I promise people don't mean that. It all comes from a place of fear, of worrying that something is a distraction from what we're trying to work on together. But it is the same forces of colonial systems, of hierarchy, of patriarchy that pull us apart rather than together.
I want to say, I don't know if you've heard it yet, but for my part, I want to say, I am so sorry that you were not given the space to be your individual, extremely impressive self, and that your incredible accomplishments were not recognized for what they were. And basically you were made you felt that you were forced into a role that you shouldn't have been forced into. And I'm really sorry, but I really admire your courage.
Thank you. And I will add that I am so overwhelmingly grateful for everyone who did show up and for everyone who is doing the hard work of making this better, of caring about it. And I also recognize that representation is incredibly important. And I took on very knowingly the responsibility of, I can't self-appoint myself, nor would I ever intend to self-appoint myself any sort of leader or representative of trans non-binary community. Of course not. And yet, when you're one of the first people to do something like this, there's never been a leadership contestant in this so-called country's history that's trans or non-binary. And so I held a space. And while doing that, I mean, to be quite honest with all of you, pronouns are not the biggest deal to me. They're just not. And yet I have to hold that space for everybody for whom it's life-threatening, because they feel so incapable of being recognized for who they are, and they don't have that safety, and they're having to put themselves out there in a world that has defined gender in such a detrimental and colonial way. And yet it is. I also notice that it matters, because it's a willingness to acknowledge it and to see somebody for who they truly are. But from my side, and from like everybody that I know, it takes time, it takes effort. People make mistakes, and that's fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And misgendering, I think, is like the scratching the surface of what it really is about, because it is about fundamental respect and dignity, humanity.
Thank you so much for that.